Our story begins with Marcus Thorne. To the world on this particular Tuesday evening, he was just another face in the crowd. A man in his late 50s, dressed in a faded flannel shirt, worn-out jeans, and a pair of scuffed work boots. His hands were calloused, his face etched with lines that spoke of experience, not of a corner office, but of a life lived. He drove a car that was as unassuming as he was, a 20-year-old sedan, its once proud blue paint now faded and peppered with small dings and scratches, a small crack spiderwebbed across the corner of the windshield. This car wasn't a statement. It was just a tool, a way to get from one place to another without drawing attention, and that was exactly what Marcus wanted. He wasn't poor, he wasn't destitute, he was invisible, by choice. See, Marcus Thorne was the newly appointed chief of police for the entire metropolitan area. He'd taken the job 3 months ago, inheriting a department plagued by complaints of excessive force, arrogance, and a growing disconnect from the very communities it was sworn to serve. The press conferences were full of promises. New training modules were being designed. Community outreach programs were announced. But Marcus knew that a rot in a tree isn't fixed by polishing the leaves. You have to inspect the roots. So for the past several weeks, he'd been doing just that. He'd take his old car, put on his old clothes, and drive. He drove through the manicured suburbs, where response times were under 2 minutes. He drove through the bustling downtown, watching officers interact with business owners and tourists. And he drove through neighborhoods like this one tonight, areas forgotten by the city budget, where trust in the police was at an all-time low. He wasn't looking for heroes. He was looking for the truth. He wanted to see his department through the eyes of the people. He needed to feel what they felt when they saw the flashing blue and red lights in their rearview mirror. Was it a feeling of safety, or was it a feeling of dread? He drove slowly, not out of caution, but out of observation. He saw kids playing basketball under a flickering street lamp. He saw an elderly woman struggling with her groceries. He saw a group of teenagers laughing on a corner, their voices echoing in the damp air. This was the city he was now responsible for. It wasn't just a collection of precincts and crime statistics. It was alive. It was breathing. And in many parts, it was hurting. He felt the weight of it in his chest, a dull ache of responsibility. He'd been a beat cop once, a long time ago. He remembered the simple, profound advice his first partner gave him. "Kid, we have the power to ruin someone's day or make it. Never forget that choice." It seemed that some of his officers had. As he turned onto a quiet, tree-lined street, he didn't notice the patrol car parked in the shadows a block behind him. He was lost in thought, pondering how to bridge the gap between his officers and the people they served. He was thinking about respect, about dignity, about the soul of his department. He had no idea that this simple drive was about to lead him into the crosshairs of the very problem he was trying to solve. Inside the patrol car, Officer Jake Miller watched Marcus's sedan crawl down the street. Miller was young, barely 26, but he carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he'd seen it all. He had a sharp jaw, a buzz cut, and eyes that were constantly scanning, not for trouble to solve, but for opportunities to assert his dominance. To him, the badge wasn't a responsibility. It was a license to judge, to command, and to be feared. His partner, Officer Davis, a quieter man who had been on the force for a decade, sat in the passenger seat, silently sipping a lukewarm coffee. "Look at this guy," Miller scoffed, nudging his partner. "Driving 10 miles under the speed limit. It's either he's lost or he's dirty." Davis glanced up, unimpressed. "Or he's just an old man, Jake. Leave him be. We've got bigger fish to fry." But Miller couldn't leave it be. It was a slow night, the kind of night that made him antsy. He craved action, the adrenaline of a confrontation. This old car, this slow-moving target, was an itch he had to scratch. It was a perfect symbol of everything he disdained: weakness, poverty, irrelevance. People like that, in his mind, were the ones who clogged up the system. They were the reason places like this were run down. He saw the faded paint and the cracked windshield not as signs of a hard-working life, but as markers of failure, and he loved to put failure in its place. "Nah," Miller said, a grin spreading across his face. "I've got a feeling about this one. Let's go have a little chat." He flicked a switch on the console. The world outside was instantly bathed in strobing red and blue light. The siren chirped once, a sharp, commanding bark in the quiet night. Inside his sedan, Marcus Thorne sighed. He saw the lights dance in his rearview mirror. He felt that familiar knot tighten in his stomach, not of fear but of profound disappointment. He knew the protocol. He pulled over to the curb slowly, placing the car in park. He turned off the engine and placed his calloused hands on the steering wheel, right where they could be seen. He watched in the mirror as two figures emerged from the patrol car. One moved with a swagger, a predatory confidence. The other hung back slightly, his movements more measured. Marcus knew in that instant this wasn't going to be a simple warning. This was going to be a test, and he was about to become the student in a lesson he was supposed to be teaching. Officer Miller approached the driver's side window, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered firearm. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" He tapped the glass sharply with his knuckle. The sound was loud, aggressive. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Marcus lowered the window, the cool, damp air filling the car. He looked up at the young officer, his expression neutral, waiting. "License and registration," Miller barked, his voice dripping with condescension. "And I want to know why you're creeping through my neighborhood like you're looking for something to steal." The first stone had been thrown, and Marcus knew this was no longer a random stop. It was a challenge. Marcus met Officer Miller's aggressive gaze with a disarming calm. He had been on the receiving end of this kind of attitude before many years ago, and he'd seen it directed at others 1,000 times since. It was the language of insecurity, spoken by a man who mistook his uniform for a personality. Instead of reacting with anger or fear, Marcus simply nodded. He reached slowly, deliberately for the glove compartment, never breaking eye contact with the officer. "Good evening, officer," Marcus said, his voice even and respectful. "I'm just passing through." "My name is Marcus," Miller sneered. "I didn't ask for your name, I asked for your license and registration now." Marcus retrieved the documents from the worn-out owner's manual. The registration was for the old sedan, clean. The license was his personal one. It read Marcus Thorne. It listed his address, a modest home in a different part of the city. It did not, of course, list his occupation. He handed them out the window. Miller snatched them from his hand, his fingers brushing Marcus's with disdain. He shone his flashlight on the ID, then back at Marcus's face, then back at the ID. "So, Marcus," Miller said, drawing out the name as if it tasted bad, "what's a guy like you doing in a neighborhood like this? You're a long way from home." "I used to know some people who lived around here," Marcus replied honestly. It was true. A lifetime ago, his first apartment was just a few blocks away, just taking a drive. "Remembering old times." "Remembering old times," Miller repeated with a hollow laugh. He turned to his partner, who was now standing by the passenger side, peering into the car. "You hear that, Davis? The old man is on a trip down memory lane." Davis just grunted in response. He seemed uncomfortable. He could sense the unnecessary escalation. There was no threat here. This was a man old enough to be his father, sitting calmly in his car. But Davis knew Miller. Once Miller started down this path, there was no turning back. He enjoyed the power play too much. Pushing people, seeing how far he could go before they broke. It was a game to him. Miller turned his attention back to Marcus. "You got anything in the car I should know about? Any weapons? Drugs? Anything that might complicate your trip down memory lane?" Marcus looked straight ahead, his hands still on the wheel. "No, officer. I have nothing illegal in my vehicle. Just some old tools in the trunk." The mention of tools made Miller's eyes light up. An opportunity. "Tools, huh? What kind of tools? The kind you use to fix a car, or the kind you use to break into one?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, we've had a lot of break-ins around here lately. An old guy in a beat-up car, driving slow, looking around. It fits a pattern." Marcus felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, but he suppressed it. Losing his temper was losing the game. He was here to learn, to observe. And he was getting a masterclass in how not to police. He was seeing the exact attitude that created the chasm of distrust he was trying to fix. He was no longer Chief Thorne, the man in charge. He was Marcus, the suspect. He was every person who had ever been judged by the car they drove, the clothes they wore, or the color of their skin. He could have ended it right there with 4 simple words, but he knew this had to play out. He had to see just how deep the rot went. Officer Miller saw the flicker of something in Marcus's eyes, a flash of defiance, maybe frustration, and he mistook it for guilt. It was all the confirmation he needed. In his mind, the narrative was already written. He, The sharp, intuitive cop had sniffed out a criminal hiding in plain sight. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. This was going to be a good arrest. The kind of arrest you could brag about back at the precinct. The kind that made you look like a hero. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, sir," Miller commanded, his tone shifting from condescending to authoritative. The "sir" was a formality, empty of any real respect. Marcus took a slow breath. "Officer, is that really necessary? I've given you my information. I've answered your questions. I'm not doing anything wrong." "It's necessary because I said it's necessary." Miller snapped back, his patience gone. "Now get out of the car before I pull you out. Your choice." This was the moment, the point of no return. Marcus knew that complying meant surrendering to a completely baseless and humiliating exercise of power. But refusing meant escalating a situation that could turn dangerous, not just for him in his disguise, but for the very principles of de-escalation he championed. He chose to comply. He had to see the process through from the perspective of the accused. He slowly opened the door and stepped out, standing under the pulsing glare of the patrol car's lights. He felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him from the windows of the nearby houses. The curtains were twitching. He wasn't just being humiliated, he was being made into a spectacle. "Hands on the hood of the car! Spread 'em!" Miller ordered. Marcus did as he was told, placing his hands on the cold, dented metal of his own car. The position was demeaning by design. He felt Miller's hands roughly pat him down, searching for weapons that weren't there. The search was unnecessarily thorough, lingering in a way that was meant to intimidate. "What's in the trunk, Marcus?" Miller asked, his voice close to Marcus's ear. "I told you, tools," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Yeah, you did," Miller said. "Davis, pop the trunk." Officer Davis, who had been a silent observer until now, hesitated for a second. "Jake, maybe we should just run his license first, see if anything comes back." "I don't need a computer to tell me my gut is right," Miller shot back, not even looking at his partner. "Open the trunk." With a sigh of resignation, Davis used the keys to open the trunk of the old sedan. Inside, just as Marcus had said, was a worn leather tool bag. Miller smirked triumphantly, as if he'd found a smoking gun. He strode to the back of the car and unzipped the bag. He pulled out a heavy wrench, a set of screwdrivers and a small crowbar. He held the crowbar up in the air, letting it catch the flashing lights. "A crowbar," Miller said loudly, for the benefit of anyone watching. "Funny tool for a guy just remembering old times. Looks more like a burglar's kit to me." He turned to Marcus, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. "I think you and I are going to take a ride downtown." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous, and Marcus knew the system he was in charge of was now closing in on him like a trap. "You're making a mistake, officer." Marcus's voice was low, but it cut through the night with a steely edge. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact. For the first time, a hint of the authority he held in his real life bled through his disguise. It was a final, quiet warning. A chance for Miller to pause, to reconsider, to pull back from the brink. But Officer Miller was too far gone, blinded by the light of his own perceived power. He heard the warning not as advice, but as a challenge to his authority. And he was not a man who backed down from a challenge, especially from someone he had already judged as worthless. "The only mistake here was you thinking you could pull a fast one on me," Miller retorted, tossing the crowbar back into the trunk with a loud clang. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Marcus didn't move. He slowly turned his head to look at the young officer. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his eyes locking onto Miller's. "You are proceeding without probable cause. You have no evidence of a crime. This is an unlawful arrest, and it will have consequences." The formal language, the precise terminology, it should have been a red flag for Miller. Most people on the street don't talk about probable cause, but Miller was too arrogant to see it. He saw it as a desperate bluff from a cornered old man. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Consequences? Buddy, I am the consequences." He grabbed Marcus's arm and spun him around, twisting it behind his back with painful force. Marcus grunted, the sudden sharp pain radiating up his shoulder. Miller was strong, and he was fueled by a mix of adrenaline and ego. He cinched the cold metal of the handcuffs around Marcus's wrists, pulling them unnecessarily tight, digging into the skin. "Jake, ease up," Officer Davis finally said, his voice laced with genuine concern. "That's too tight. There's no need for that." He was resisting, Miller lied, shoving Marcus forward toward the patrol car. "You saw it." Davis hadn't seen that. He had seen a man standing still, speaking calmly. He saw his partner losing control, letting a routine stop spiral into an abuse of power. A knot of unease tightened in Davis's stomach. This felt wrong. Every part of it. The old man hadn't been aggressive. He hadn't been disrespectful, not really. He had been patient, almost like he was waiting for this to happen. The thought was strange, and Davis pushed it away, but the feeling remained. Miller opened the back door of the patrol car and pushed Marcus inside. There was no care, no guidance. Marcus's head hit the doorframe, and he stumbled onto the hard plastic seat. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing with a grim finality. The world was now a cage of plexiglass and metal mesh. He could see the two officers through the partition, their forms distorted, their conversation muffled. He saw Davis shake his head, a look of frustration on his face. He saw Miller grin, triumphant, as he got back behind the wheel. Sitting in the back of his own department's car in handcuffs, Marcus Thorne felt the full, crushing weight of the injustice. He thought of all the other people who had sat here, the ones who didn't have a trump card to play, the ones whose lives could be shattered by a night like this, a lost job, a criminal record, a broken spirit. The anger he'd suppressed was now a cold, hard stone in his gut. His investigation was no longer academic. It had just become deeply, painfully personal. The ride to the precinct was a study in contrasts. In the back, Marcus was a picture of stoic silence. He sat perfectly still, his cuffed hands resting in his lap. His gaze was fixed, looking out the window at the city he was sworn to protect, now passing by as if he were a prisoner of war. He wasn't just observing anymore, he was absorbing. He memorized the route they took. He listened to the crackle of the radio, the mundane chatter about other calls, other lives intersecting with the law tonight. He felt the vibration of the engine, the sway of the car as it took each turn. He was cementing every detail of this experience into his memory. This humiliation would not be wasted. It would become fuel. In the front, Officer Miller was the opposite. He was giddy with victory. He couldn't stop talking, replaying the events of the stop for his partner, embellishing details to make himself sound even more heroic. "Did you see the look on his face when I found that crowbar?" Miller said, glancing at Davis, hungry for validation. He knew the jig was up, classic burglar's tool. He was probably casing that whole block, just waiting for someone to leave a window unlocked. Davis stared out his own window, his silence a heavy counterpoint to Miller's excitement. "I don't know, Jake. His car was clean. He didn't have anything on him. His story about driving around, it was weird, but it's not impossible." "Oh, come on, Davis, loosen up." Miller laughed, slapping the steering wheel. "You gotta trust your gut in this job. My gut told me he was a creep from the second I saw him. And my gut is never wrong. This is a good collar. We took a predator off the streets tonight. The captain will probably give us a commendation." The irony of that statement was so thick, so potent, that Marcus almost smiled. The captain, if only he knew. But Marcus remained silent, his face an unreadable mask. He let Miller continue his victory lap. Each word of pride, each boastful claim was another shovel of dirt on the grave Miller was digging for his own career. "He tried to get tough too," Miller went on, looking at Marcus in the rearview mirror with a smug grin. "Started spouting off about probable cause and consequences, like some TV lawyer. I showed him consequences, didn't I?" Marcus met his eyes in the mirror. He held his gaze, his expression unchanging. The lack of fear, the unnerving stillness from his prisoner should have worried Miller. It should have been the biggest red flag of all. Scared people fidget. Guilty people talk too much, or not at all. Angry people yell. But Marcus was none of those things. He was centered. His calmness was an invisible shield that Miller's taunts couldn't penetrate, and that, more than anything, began to frustrate the young officer. He wanted a reaction. He wanted his prisoner to cry, to beg, to curse him. He wanted validation that he had broken him. But he got nothing, just that steady, unnerving gaze in the rearview mirror. As they pulled into the brightly lit sally port of the central precinct, the garage door rumbling shut behind them, Miller felt a flicker of doubt for the first time. It was a tiny crack in his armor of arrogance. Why wasn't this old man afraid? He pushed the doubt aside. In a few minutes, he'd be processing his prisoner, and this would all be over, or so he thought. The air inside the precinct's intake bay was thick, with the familiar smell of antiseptic, stale coffee, and quiet desperation. It was a place of harsh, fluorescent lighting that bleached all the color from the world, leaving only stark shades of gray. For Officer Miller, this was his stage. He got out of the car with a flourish, eager to parade his catch in front of his colleagues. He pulled Marcus from the back seat, his grip on the man's arm still unnecessarily firm. "Got a live one here," Miller announced to the two officers processing paperwork at a nearby desk. "Caught him prowling over on the west side, trunk full of burglary tools." The other officers glanced up, their faces showing mild interest before returning to their work. An old man in worn clothes was hardly the catch of the century, but Miller was determined to sell it. He pushed Marcus forward, leading him on what is known among cops as the perp walk. It's a short journey from the car to the booking desk, but it's a path laden with psychological weight. It's designed to strip away the last vestiges of a person's dignity before they are swallowed by the system. Marcus felt the eyes on him. He saw the bored expressions, the flicker of pity, the silent judgment. He kept his head held high. He wasn't ashamed. He was angry. A cold, controlled anger that was hardening into resolve with every step. He was walking through the heart of his own department, yet he had never felt more like an outsider. He saw the cracks in the walls, the peeling paint, the worn-out equipment. He saw the tired, cynical faces of officers on a long night shift, and he saw his escort, Officer Miller, puffed up with a pride that was entirely misplaced. They reached the booking desk, a high counter that served as the final barrier between the outside world and a jail cell. Behind it sat Sergeant Frank Peterson. Peterson was a man in his late 60s, a relic from a different era of policing. He had 35 years on the job, and his face was a roadmap of every one of them. He'd seen thousands of cops come and go. He'd seen rookies full of fire turn into jaded veterans. He had a sixth sense for trouble, and an even better one for sniffing out arrogance. He looked up over his reading glasses as Miller and his prisoner approached. "What have you got, Miller?" Peterson asked, his voice a low grumble. "Booking him for possession of burglary tools and suspicion of attempted burglary," Miller said proudly. "This is Marcus Thorne. We're going to need his prints, photo, the whole 9 yards. Sergeant Peterson looked at the name Miller had written on the initial form. Then he looked at the man standing before him. He squinted, leaning forward slightly. His eyes, which had been tired and bored a moment ago, suddenly sharpened with focus. A flicker of disbelief, then dawning recognition. He looked from the man's face to his worn-out clothes and back to his face. The sergeant's posture changed instantly. He sat up straight, his expression shifting from weary indifference to one of absolute, undisguised shock. His face went pale. He slowly took off his reading glasses and stared at Marcus. "My God," Peterson whispered, his voice barely audible. Miller didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying his moment. "Yeah, I know. Can't believe he was still out there doing this stuff at his age. Some people never learn." Peterson ignored Miller completely. He continued to stare at Marcus, his mouth slightly agape. He then looked down at the handcuffs biting into the man's wrists. A wave of horror washed over the veteran sergeant's face. He looked at Miller, then back at Marcus, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Officer Miller thought the sergeant was impressed by his arrest. He was about to learn in the most brutal way possible that the look on Peterson's face wasn't admiration. It was pure, unadulterated terror. "Miller," Sergeant Peterson said, his voice quiet but charged with an urgency that made the young officer finally pay attention. "What did you do?" Miller was confused by the question. "What do you mean, what did I do? I did my job. I arrested a suspect." Peterson, slowly, deliberately, pushed a small, discreet button under his desk. It wasn't a panic button, not in the traditional sense. It was a silent alert that summoned the precinct's watch commander immediately. Then he stood up. For a man his age, he moved with surprising speed. He walked around the desk until he was standing in front of Marcus. He looked at the handcuffs, then at Miller, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and fear. "Get those cuffs off him," Peterson ordered, his voice no longer a grumble, but a sharp, authoritative command. "Right now." Miller was completely bewildered. "What? Sarge, he's a suspect. I haven't even read him his rights yet for the formal booking." "I said take them off. That's an order, officer." Peterson's use of the formal title was a clear and deliberate slap. Officer Davis, who had been standing by silently, now stepped forward. He had seen the look on Peterson's face. He knew the veteran sergeant didn't make mistakes like this. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Davis pulled the key from his own belt, and before Miller could protest further, he was uncuffing Marcus Thorne. The metal bracelets fell away, leaving angry red marks on Marcus's wrists. Marcus rubbed his wrists, the circulation slowly returning. He looked at Sergeant Peterson and gave a slight appreciative nod. "Thank you, Frank," he said simply. The use of the sergeant's first name was the final clue for Miller. His smug confidence finally shattered, replaced by a dawning, sickening dread. He looked back and forth between the old respected sergeant and the old disheveled man he had just dragged into the station. How did they know each other? Just then, a lieutenant, the watch commander, came jogging down the hallway, alerted by the silent alarm. "Frank, what's going on? You buzzed." The lieutenant stopped dead in his tracks when he saw who was standing at the booking desk. His professional demeanor evaporated, replaced by the same look of shock that had been on Peterson's face. "Chief Thorne?" the lieutenant stammered, his eyes wide. "Sir, what are you doing here? Are you all right?" "Chief." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. It echoed in the suddenly silent booking area. Officer Davis took an involuntary step back, his face ashen. He looked at his partner, who seemed to have been turned to stone. Officer Jake Miller's world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from his face. His mouth went dry. His mind frantically replayed the last hour. The condescending tone, the baseless accusations, the rough hands, the tight cuffs, the gloating in the car, the walk of shame. He hadn't been arresting some forgotten old man, some street-level criminal. He had been arresting, harassing, and humiliating his own boss, the highest-ranking police officer in the entire city, the man who held his career, his future, his entire professional life in the palm of his calloused hand. Marcus Thorne slowly straightened up, his posture changing. The tired, unassuming old man vanished. In his place stood the chief of police, and he turned his cold, steady gaze directly onto the young man who had just arrested him. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Officer Miller stood frozen, his face a canvas of disbelief and horror. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. In a way he had, the ghost of his own career. Chief Marcus Thorne took a step forward. He was no longer playing a role. The humility in his posture was replaced by the quiet, unshakable authority he had earned over decades of service. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His voice was calm, measured, but each word landed with the weight of a hammer blow. "Officer Miller," he began, his eyes locked on the young man. "A few hours ago, I was just a citizen driving through a city I love. I was a man in an old car, which in your eyes made me a target. You judged me not on my actions, but on my appearance. You saw a faded shirt and a cracked windshield, and you decided I was a criminal." He took another step. Miller instinctively flinched. "You had no probable cause. You had no witness. You had no evidence of a crime being committed. You had nothing but your own prejudice. And you used the authority this city gave you, the authority I gave you, to harass me, to humiliate me, to unlawfully arrest me." He paused, letting the words sink in. He glanced at Officer Davis, whose face was filled with regret. "You, Officer Davis," the chief said, his tone softening slightly. "I heard you. I heard your hesitation. You knew this was wrong. But you didn't stop it. You stood by and you let it happen. Remember this: silence in the face of injustice makes you a participant." Davis looked down at the floor, ashamed. Then the chief's focus returned to Miller, his gaze hardening again. "You mocked me. You put your hands on me with unnecessary force. You put these cuffs on so tight," he said, holding up his wrists to show the raw red marks, "that you caused me physical pain. For what? For your ego, to get a laugh, to feel like a big man?" Miller finally found his voice, a pathetic, trembling whisper. "Sir, I didn't know. I swear I had no idea it was you. And that was the final mistake." Chief Thorne's expression turned to ice. "That," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low, "is the entire problem. It shouldn't matter who I am. You shouldn't have to know that I'm the chief of police to treat me, or any other citizen, with basic respect and dignity. You should do it because it's your job. You should do it because that badge on your chest is not a crown, it's a shield. You're meant to stand between the public and harm, not be the harm. You treated me this way because you thought I was nobody, and that tells me you've probably done this to countless other people who, unlike me, didn't have the power to stand here and hold you accountable." He let that final damning accusation hang in the air. The truth of it was undeniable, and everyone in that room knew it. "Hand me your badge and your service weapon, officer," the chief commanded. His voice left no room for argument. With trembling hands, his face a mask of utter defeat, Jake Miller unclipped his badge from his uniform. The metal felt impossibly heavy. He unholstered his weapon and placed them both on Sergeant Peterson's desk. The metallic clatter was the sound of a career ending. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow emptiness of a man who had just lost everything because he failed the simplest test of all. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Officer Jake Miller was not fired. Not immediately. That would have been too easy. Chief Thorne placed him on indefinite suspension without pay, pending a full internal affairs investigation, an investigation the chief himself would personally oversee. Miller was also mandated to attend counseling and a series of intensive retraining courses focused on de-escalation, community relations, and implicit bias. His future on the force was uncertain, hanging by the thinnest of threads. The chief didn't just want to punish him. He wanted to know if the man was capable of being reformed. Officer Davis received a formal reprimand in his file and was assigned to partner with a veteran field training officer for 3 months. He was being given a second chance, a chance to find the voice he'd failed to use that night. The chief saw the flicker of good conscience in him and decided it was worth cultivating. But the real changes went far beyond 2 officers. The very next day, Chief Marcus Thorne called a mandatory assembly of every command-level officer in the department. He stood before them, not in a suit and tie, but in the same faded flannel shirt and worn-out jeans from the night before. He didn't just tell them the story, he made them feel it. He spoke of the humiliation, the helplessness, the cold steel of the handcuffs. He described in detail how it felt to be judged, dismissed, and abused by one of their own. His story became a legend in the department, a cautionary tale whispered in locker rooms and roll calls. It was dubbed the Chief's Ride. It served as a stark, powerful reminder of the responsibility that came with the badge. Chief Thorne used the incident as a catalyst for sweeping department-wide reform. He launched the Marcus Thorne Initiative, a new training program built around the core principles of dignity and respect. It became mandatory for every single officer, from the rawest rookie to the most seasoned veteran. He started showing up unannounced at roll calls, in different precincts, sometimes in his uniform, sometimes in his old flannel shirt. His presence a constant reminder. Treat every citizen as if you're treating your boss because, he would say, they are. The lesson was clear and resonated through every level of the force. True authority isn't about projecting power, it's about earning trust. It's not about being the loudest voice in the room, but the most respectful one. It's a reminder that beneath any uniform, any title, or any set of clothes is a human being deserving of dignity. Officer Miller's arrogance had given Chief Thorne the ultimate weapon, a real-life, undeniable example of the rot within his department, and he used that weapon to perform surgery. It was painful, and it was difficult, but it was necessary to save the soul of the institution he now led. The story serves as a lesson for us all. Be careful how you treat people. The person you look down on today might be the one you have to answer to tomorrow. Power is a fleeting illusion, but character is eternal. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful life lessons every week.